Morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is David MacLennan, and I'm the chair of the WA chapter of the National Regulators Community of Practice. My day job is being the Chief Executive Officer at the City of Vincent, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to elders, past and present. What is NRCoP? Some of you are already members. For those of you who are not, who are thinking about joining, please do. We're an active network of public sector regulators from all three levels of government and from every sector and profession, and we are keen to learn from and with each other. We support each other to become better regulators and to promote the value of regulation in our society. This community of practice began as an informal network of Victorian, mainly state government regulators who were inspired by Harvard professor Malcolm Sparrow's workshops at the Australia-New Zealand School of Government. Since 2018, the community of practice has gone national with the support of ANZSOG. Each state chapter has its own committee with at least 2 representatives on the National Steering Committee. I'd like to welcome Dr. Marion Free, who's the Director of Regulatory Practice from ANZSOG and was appointed at the start of this year to support NRCoP across the country. I'd also like to acknowledge Jenness Gardner, the Chief Executive Officer of the Economic Regulation Authority, who's the immediate past WA Chapter Chair. I think Jenness and I probably had a similar introduction to NRCoP and what it was all about around 2018, I forget the exact date, might have been the start of 2019. We both turned up as the state government agency reps to a meeting convened by Lanie. I didn't know too much about what the meeting was going to be about, but I was sent by my then Director General, and when Lanie summons you to an interagency meeting, you attend. Don't ask too many questions. And if any of you are wondering, I've only known Lanie since she was appointed Director General. She is a force of nature, and she was a force of nature before she was Director General as well. At that interagency meeting, Lanie made the case for setting up a WA chapter of NRCoP. And while we've gone online over the last couple of years of COVID, we have now reconvened in-person meetings. It's a bit touch and go this week. It's the mask on, mask off debate again, and the working from home or not working from home debate on again. But I'm really pleased that you all made the effort to get here in person, and thanks for your attendance today. I'm personally drawn and get most passionate about stories of poor regulation, bad regulation, or regulation go wrong. So the films that I like to watch are things like The Insider with Al Pacino and Russell Crowe about a whistleblower in the tobacco industry, or the great story of Erin Brockovich and her campaign against contamination in the environment. I love The Big Short about the global financial crisis and the failings of financial regulation. If you haven't seen Dope Stick, it's a brilliant series, I think, on Disney, which is the origin of an entirely preventable opioid epidemic in some states, not all states, but some states of the United States. A lot has been written about the Enron scandal and their fraudulent behaviour, as well as Australia's recent banking scandals. There have been a lot of really good responses to COVID around the world over the past two and a half years, but there have also been some shocking disasters, the cost of which is counted in over 6 million lives lost. The highest number of deaths has been in the richest country of the world. How can that be? Good regulation and regulatory practice can and should stop bad things from happening. But the focus shouldn't just be on preventing the fallout of bad, fraudulent or criminal behaviour. I'm here as a true believer in the positive role that government regulation plays in supporting the very high standard of living, our well-being and prosperity, which all contribute to making this such a great country to live in. So we come together as a community of practice to share lessons learned, both good and bad. I think Lanie probably has a mixture of some of the good and the bad lessons to be learnt from the Casino Royal Commission, but we share those lessons so we can improve our regulatory craft and to help make this country the best that it can be. So in that vein, I'm very pleased to introduce Lanie Chopping to speak about the lessons for regulators from the Perth Casino Royal Commission. After Lanie's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session on Slido, and Lanie, Jenness and I, as the current, immediate past and the inaugural chair of NRCoP, will be very keen to talk to you about why you should join NRCoP and why you should get involved. So, welcome to Lanie Chopping.
Kaya everyone, and thank you for having me today. I want to say to you, Nunj Jerban Nunga Neringa Beria Mila Nunga Mort Court Jinanin, which is I send good feelings towards the old people of the landowners, their ancestors, and to the people who one day will be old, and to acknowledge that we are blessed to be able to meet today on Wajak Nunga Buja in Boorloo, and it's not raining right at the moment. When I was chair of NRCoP and came to these on a regular basis, I'd always try and make a connection between the season that we were facing outside. I think we've had more rainy days in times that I've stood in this position than any others. So yes, acknowledging and also thanking Jenness and David for the invitation to come along and talk to you today about the Royal Commission. Now, there's a lot of people in this room that I know. I feel a little bit like this is your life. I'm kind of like, oh, I love you. Oh, I love you. Oh, you're great. And then there's all the new people I work. Oh, you're great. You're fantastic. So, but there's also a lot of people that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting as yet. So, but this is the first time that I've spoken publicly about the Royal Commission. Since I started in the role of Director General at the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries on the 31st of May last year. And it's nice to be able to speak to a bunch of regulators, because you don't have to educate people about what regulation is in the first instance before you get started on the conversation. I do remember a conversation that I had with the State Solicitor at the time, so Nick Egan said to me, Lanie, what did they tell you about this job before you accepted the job? And I said, yeah, not a lot about this bit. And he said, yeah. And then he said, have you seen the movie Jaws? And I said, yeah. He said, you know that bit where they say, we're going to need a bigger boat? I said, yeah. He said, you're going to need a bigger boat. And those words will always stay with me. So can I say that I think as a foundation, so when I stepped into this job, I also became the chair by legislation, the chair of the Gaming and Wagering Commission, which is the entity responsible for regulating not just the casino, but also community gaming and other forms of gaming in Western Australia. And that's a job in and of itself. And the Royal Commission has indeed recommended that an independent chair be appointed. So I inherited that job. I also inherited the job of leading the regulatory team for local governments in Western Australia. So our department performs that function. And also as the Director of Liquor Licensing. So so that's another regulatory role that the department holds. We did have the reputation of being the Department of the Weekends. People might have heard that before, or the Department of Good Times. I can tell you that that there are those parts. So we do have sport and recreation, and we also have culture and arts. But we do have a strong regulatory focus within the organisation. So I should say that as regulators, we seek to promote and conduct ourselves with competence and integrity. We deliver regulatory services in an environment with a high profile and often substantial community interest in what we do. And I think we understand that we're judged on our ability to protect the public before harm occurs and to sanction and deter misconduct. So I came with that lens to this role. But I do have a lot of sympathy for my predecessor, who I have spent many hours talking with during the transition and subsequently, for people who are entering roles in regulatory agencies as leaders or decision makers in those organisations when they don't necessarily come from a regulatory background. And so I suspect that the reason that I was ultimately then applied and was appointed to the position was probably not because of my sport and recreation prowess or because of my culture and arts prowess, but it was more to do with the regulatory experience. And I'm a really strong believer in if you're a regulator and you're a regulatory practitioner, you can be a regulator in any context. So if you're an environment regulator, as Jermaine Larkham is and has been, she could do equally well as the Executive Director of Racing, Gaming and Liquor, for which she was for a period of time, and with eternal gratitude for me for taking up that role. So that's how I got to be where I am. So Royal Commissions, I did say last year at the Director General Christmas dinner, we were asked to go around and say what was the major things that happened to us this year, and I said, well, I think pretty much I'm the only person in this room who's ever been on the stand at a Royal Commission. And the now Governor put his hand up and said, hang on a minute, I'm the other person. So there were two of us who'd ever been in that experience. There's today, I think there might be more than two of us who've been on the stand in a Royal Commission, but there's at least two of us in the room. And it is, without a doubt, probably the most confronting thing that would ever be able to happen to you as a public servant, to be in that position of being on the stand, having absolutely no understanding about what is going to happen in the 3 or 4 hours that are in front of you to be questioned. And it's like having a colonoscopy in the Murray Street Mall. That's what I likened it to. Jermaine, I'm not sure if that was. I think I said to you, don't worry, Jermaine, this will be the most formative experience that you will ever have as a public servant. See it as a growth and learning opportunity. So Royal Commissions, they are not pleasant and they are to be avoided at all costs. They're unpleasant while they're happening, but they also are unpleasant in the lead up to them usually, and then in the aftermath. So let this, if nothing else, be a cautionary tale for people here today. So ultimately, after a 12-month period of intense scrutiny and turmoil and disruption for the team within the department, and the department itself, and for the government, we received a 1,000-page report with 59 formal recommendations that inquired into two things: the suitability of Crown to hold a casino gambling licence and the state's regulatory framework and the conduct of the department and other players within that. I can say I'd come from making statutory decisions about what a fit and proper person or entity was in real estate and settlement, and the person who succeeded me is in the room today. I had thought the fit and proper test was basically, we're going to do an MPC, we're going to make sure if it's clear, and generally speaking, unless they've got any compliance history with us, that's all there is to it, and they're fit and proper. But the Royal Commission, obviously our legislative basis is different in gaming, but the Royal Commission shone a light on the fact that what we think as regulators might be a sufficient fit and proper test is not necessarily what Royal Commissioners will determine is a fit and proper test. This speaks to some of the lessons that we learned about co-regulatory responsibility. So, you know, we're all regulators in the room. Most of us have all been around for a long time. We know what it is to say, phew, that's not my issue. That's actually the Food and Drug Standards Authority, or that is actually a work safety issue. It's not my issue. I don't have to deal with that. It's not our regulatory responsibility. Well, the Royal Commission showed really clearly the Commissioner's expectation that us as regulators, that doesn't look good. Threats and violations found. That's a perfect segue. That we were not responsible for money laundering, or for the conduct of the people who were involved in operating the casino when it came to money laundering or the prevention of counter-terrorism so funding that goes towards terrorism. We thought, as a department, generally speaking, that it's not our responsibility, it's AUSTRAC's responsibility. You know, I'm sure that WAPOL felt exactly the same way, that it wasn't their responsibility, it was AUSTRAC's responsibility. So we can say that, and we can make ourselves feel more comfortable by saying it's not our primary regulatory responsibility, but the Royal Commission definitely pointed to the fact that we had a responsibility to do something, and that there were shortcomings in terms of what we did in that space. So you've all seen the headlines, and I won't go into the gory details, but you know, I will say that we spent more than 2,000 hours for staff on top of trying to actually remediate some of our deficiencies, because those were on display every day in the Royal Commission. So we were fixing things up and trying to improve our business practices and our regulatory practice, as well as responding to 2,100 records tendered, as well as dealing with being witnesses, the process for preparing to be a witness, and all of the work that goes into that, working with state solicitors, many hours. And at the same time, and I look over here to my colleagues in the back of the room, at the same time trying to hold together the business of doing the day-to-day work that we need to do to continue to keep the business running. And it's all very good for people to postulate on, you know, what the problem is, or what people should do better, or what people should do differently, but the people who are at the back of the room, they still came to work every day and they still did the job when the media had these things to say about them, and they were subject to a significant amount of scrutiny and turmoil at the same time. So I commend the people from our team who are here today who have stayed the course. That is true grit and determination in public service, and you know who you are. So I won't rehash the focus of what the Royal Commission substantively came up with, and you can read the quote on there. But I will talk about the lessons. So there's 7 lessons. I think, you know, you've seen the media, you've seen the hype, you've seen those issues. Integrity for us as a regulator, integrity for the regulator is absolutely paramount. So our lessons were that our integrity structures were insufficient to be able to deal with the issues around conflicts of interest, gifts, benefits, hospitality. The way in which the organisation had its systems established was insufficient to match modern community expectations and standards. That were things like, you know, and when I began my career in the public service, if someone invited you to go to the football box, you basically wrote it on a register, or it was there, you put it to your boss, they said, oh, well, as long as everybody can see that you accepted the invitation, then there's no problem. You just register it and off you go. And in 15 years or 20 years between that and last year, the community expectations around what's acceptable have really changed. So in that, what they essentially found is that the management line upwards was insufficiently robust in reflecting standards in the decisions that they made in relation to gifts, benefits, hospitality and conflicts of interest. That's at the heart of it. So we can fix the structures and processes, but we couldn't necessarily get to the heart of the culture that actually led to those kinds of things being considered to be okay. And that's been a big piece of work for us, and a big piece of hearts and mind changes. At the heart of it, good culture underpins effective decision-making and good governance. But we have to make sure as regulators that we have aligned those cultures so that everyone has a shared understanding of what our regulatory culture is within the organisation, and that people have signed up to that. I think I said to the team as a whole in the very beginning, I said, I'm okay if you share a different view to that. Like, I'm okay if we're not all on the same page in terms of what the culture should be, or what the values should be, or what the approach is going to be. But that is how it's going to be here. And so if you're not wanting to sign up to that, that's okay. We can find another alternative for you to work in a different job somewhere else. That's all fine. But we need to go this way. And I'm, you know, some people have chosen to retire. You know, some people have chosen to take other jobs. And luckily for us, some people have decided to stay on and be part of the change. Culture is leader-led. So, you know, the amount of times that I've heard from people who work in that area, well, we tried to point that out, but we were told no. Or we tried to raise that issue, but we were told no. So as leaders, and many of you are leaders of your areas here, what the culture that we set and the culture that we accept is the culture that will prevail within the organisation, and that's important for you to reflect on in terms of what is the culture that you are leading. And importantly, we need to understand the culture of regulated entities. So interestingly, you know, in my conversations with the new licence holders for Crown Perth, and I came from a conversation that Jennifer and I are involved in yesterday, interestingly, the culture of our regulatory organisation and the culture of the regulated entity were actually quite similar. There's a lot of similarities between those cultures, and there was a lot of osmosis between those cultures, yeah? So, and an unhealthy culture within our organisation and an unhealthy compliance culture within their organisation. And part of the closeness of the relationship that existed between the two parties meant that those systems fed each other by osmosis. And there's obviously a whole 20-minute presentation on that in itself. Finding the balance. So it's been really important for us to find the appropriate use of our regulatory tools. The Commission has ultimately found that our legislation is out of date and needs a whole refresh, and we need higher infringements and penalties and all that stuff that would probably be the case in most of your pieces of legislation if they haven't been reviewed for a while. But the appropriate use of regulatory tools. We've got regulatory tools that we never used. And I think those of you who've done the program with Professor Sparrow would have seen that, you know, what's the point of having a toolbox if you only ever use the hammer? You've never used any other tool in the toolbox. You know, you need to use what you've actually got to be able to make the best of it. But sometimes in that balance, the pressure that is applied from above, or the pressure that's applied through community expectations, is often to be a good mate or be a good enabler. And we're very much in that period at the moment of enabling industry. You know, we want economic growth, we want jobs, 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 yeah? And that's all good, and we can be part of that, but we need to actually hold the line in relation to still doing our job as regulators. The two are not mutually exclusive, but sometimes we do, to actually get the economic benefit and the jobs, we actually need to do our job as good, strong regulators, because a good, compliant and strong operator is actually going to achieve the outcome in the medium and long term. And that legislation needs to be fit for purpose, and we talked about that. So our governance was in the spotlight like you've never seen in your life. So if you don't have all of your governance lined up in relation to your delegations, and delegations is absolutely central, you know, having absolute crystal clarity about your delegations framework, how it operates, how it's reported on, the instruments that are actually being used, the paperwork that's actually used to make decisions. We have been caught out time and time again because of the fact that our governance was insufficient to be able to cope with scrutiny in relation to the decisions that were made. Communication between agencies, and I talked about that in relation, and you've seen that in relation to AUSTRAC. So this issue around MOUs and having appropriate understanding about information sharing between entities is really, really important, and that good governance is everyone's responsibility. So we need to be fixing things as we go, but we need to be looking at things with that lens that says, is this actually best practice in governance? If not, what help do we need to actually review it to improve it? Trust takes time to repair. So trust is those of you who are, some people are, I've found in my journey, like total Royal Commission nuts. They really like Royal Commissions. They really follow them in detail, and they want to kind of talk about, when such and such said that on the stand, I thought it was an interesting line of questioning from counsel assisting and that kind of stuff. Most people don't have the time or inclination or have other things that they want to do. But those of you who did happen to see my comments when I was on the stand, was asked a question around what I thought was going on, and I said, ultimately the members of the Gaming and Wagering Commission were too trusting, in my opinion, of the regulated entity. There was too much trust. And there was too much trust of the department. There was too much trust of the staff in the department. And what that led to was that there was a lack of scrutiny and a lack of critical thinking by the Gaming and Wagering Commission members. I think acknowledging failings, and I think failings is a very strong word, but none of us, I would challenge any of you to put your hand up and say, you know what, we are bang on perfect as a regulator. Bring on the Royal Commission, because we're open to any scrutiny because we're perfect. Because I reckon no regulator in Australia could put their hand up and say that they are without failings. But acknowledging and understanding where your failures exist and what your critical capabilities are, and then setting out to remediate those step by step has been the hard graft of Jermaine and the hard graft of Jennifer and the teams that existed in the organisation and have been now built in the organisation to build that work that is often really annoying, boring or detailed. It's not exciting work to build governance structures, or it's not exciting work to design a risk management framework for your compliance program. That's not exciting work, but it's very, very important work, and that's been pretty much the focus that we've had over the last 12 months. And also understanding the community's expectations. So what we thought we were doing with the casino was very different to what the community expectation was, as articulated by the Royal Commission, the media, stakeholders, etc. Those expectations were out of sync. They were definitely out of sync at the leadership level, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So lesson 5 for us is that change is inevitable, that change for the regulator and change for the regulated entity is inevitable. We have much less contact with the regulated entity now than we had 2 years ago. We have probably more contact over the last 2 months than we have had over the last year, because we're in a rebuilding period, but that relationship, the rebuilding, is based very much on very firm ground rules about communication protocols and how we interact with each other. And we want to have an appropriate level of tension. We don't want to not have a positive and constructive relationship, but we want to have an appropriate level of separateness. And that's going to take learning for us, and it's going to take learning for them. They've got a totally new kind of ownership, board structure and management structure that enables that, and similarly we've got that on our side. Strengthening of our legislative powers, and people might have seen there's legislation before Parliament at the moment, and there'll be more tranches of legislation, so there's a huge reform journey, and that is going to be really expensive. So the good side, I think, and I just came from a call about this, the good side is people, when you've been through a Royal Commission, people want to give you massive amounts of money, and it's sometimes that issue of saying, well, that's great, and we're happy to receive your money. I'm just flagging with you that money doesn't necessarily fix all problems. So it can fix some problems, but there are some things that are just going to take a little bit of time. And we really have found that. I'm not speaking out of school to say, we've had difficulty advertising, difficulty recruiting people. When you've been through a Royal Commission, people, I've got threats and violations again here. When you've been through a Royal Commission, it's not kind of like people, I'm sure, I don't know, I could be wrong, but if you don't work for our department at the moment, are you out there going, oh my God, I cannot wait for them to advertise those jobs in racing, gaming and liquor in the department, because I am busting to get on board. If you are, feel free to see Lee up the back here. Lee, raise your hand. Feel free to see Lee. He's looking, because we have had experiences, and this is market conditions and a range of other things, but we advertise for positions that are critical, that the government needs public servants to come and do these jobs, because we have to actually get this show back on the road, and have things like no one apply, like not one single person. So we, that is going to take us some work to be able to find creative ways to stock up, because people, as you would all know and appreciate, Cabinet makes a decision that says, we're going to give you all this money and you're going to do this thing and you're going to start it tomorrow. And life just doesn't work that way, because we need people with capability as well. So we need people who know regulation, who know inspections, who know how to do compliance work. So we need to, we obviously need to understand how our environment has changed, and we also need to deal with the uncertainty about the future. 59 recommendations, the government hasn't responded yet to those recommendations. The Department of Premier and Cabinet is responsible for the government's response, so we don't have our hands on all the levers, and we don't know what the future looks like, which is also a challenge to maintain business as usual. So capability and capacity is key to future reform. So just because we haven't got enough on our plate, we are also one of the 3 cabs off the rank for this year's agency capability reviews. So I see colleagues at Demirs have been through agency capability review already. But capability and capacity is really key to future reform. So we've set about making sure that we're providing the appropriate training and professional development for all the staff that work in our regulatory areas. We want to empower staff with systems and tools and knowledge and skills. We want to strengthen our regulatory capability both as regulators more broadly, but regulators specifically in the casino and gaming space. We need to build better relationships with other regulators, which is part of, NRCoP is a great way to be able to do that. And we need to increase our capacity to undertake reform as well as delivering business as usual. So I'm sure that the people who've signed up for the Gaming and Wagering Commission as commission members had no idea how little they would be paid for how much work they are required to do. So if you're out there thinking, oh, I'm going to retire soon and go on a board, have we got a job for you? I think that'll be, in the future, people with regulatory experience, statutory boards who are regulatory decision makers. That is a lesson from the Royal Commission for us, is you really need people who understand regulation to be appointed to these decision-making boards where boards still exist. And boards still do exist in this space, even where you say that they shouldn't. So although in some areas boards have been abolished, so if you want to know about that, you can see Gary Newcomb, who's sitting up the front here, who's the champion of abolishing boards, I think, is that right? You could do your own NRCoP session on getting rid of regulatory boards. And then the final lesson for us is this question of, can regulation maximise benefits while minimising harm? This is a whole session in itself, but some of the things that when you take a job like this, everyone wants to tell you what they think about what's going on in the Royal Commission and what they think your job should be. So it's a really interesting journey. Some people thought that the main reason that we existed was to make sure that 5,000 people had their jobs at the casino, and the casino was a happening thing. So enablement was the real focus. Other people thought, these guys are a bunch of absolute criminals and everyone knows it, and you should be out there policing the hell out of it. In the meantime, things like harm and the harm that gambling causes to the community, which is a key focus of the Gaming and Wagering Commission, didn't really get spoken about at all. So we've set about trying to make sure that we're very, very solid about what our actual regulatory purpose is, and that we all sing from the same hymn sheet in relation to that, and that we stay clear on what our focus is, despite what others, including elected members of government, might have to say about what they think our purpose is, because we know the legislation sets our purpose and we're guided by that. So I can't say how important it is for people to reflect on their on their legislative stated purpose and be very, very aligned with that. And all of you will have been through your own journeys of what it's like to be under scrutiny, but also under pressure to act in a manner that might be in some way not, and suffer the consequences, because it's unpleasant to be treated badly when you're trying to exercise your independence. And that's politics. Okay, so this is my last slide. You haven't rung the bell yet, so that's good. So key leadership takeaways. So this is for people who are working in leadership and management positions, which many of you are. Building resilience in people, focusing on how you, whilst you're setting about a reform journey, to actually make things, to make a step change in terms of all the things that we've spoken about today and more. If you lose everybody, and we lost a lot of people, in key positions of corporate knowledge, and for some, you know, I mean, you all read the papers, you've seen, you know, that people don't sit in the same jobs that they sat in previously, and we've had new people come in, and the people who've been there for a really long time have had to adjust to the new people and stay the course. And the new people have had to be sensitive to the fact that the people who've been there for a long time, they're not the ones who caused the challenges that we face, so how do we actually keep the team together and develop the team and build that resilience that we need when everyone is bearing down with their own opinion about this department or this area? We need to set and model the standard of behaviour. So we've done that in a first tranche, but we will continue to do that. I don't go to Crown, not because I'm not allowed to go to Crown, although I'm not allowed to gamble, but I don't go to Crown because I don't ever want to be in a situation where my integrity is called into question in relation to the regulated entity. Now, that's a choice that I have made, but it's a choice that others in the organisation will ultimately need to make at some point in the future, because for us to make sure that we are beyond reproach, we're going to need to go the extra mile in relation to issues like conflict of interest and gifts, benefits and hospitality. So we need to set and model a standard of behaviour, and that goes for our regulatory areas, but it goes for our whole business. It goes for, I mean, if you can imagine the amount of stuff that happens in culture and the arts and sport and recreation in terms of people who want to do business in particular ways. So, you know, we need to set and model the standard of behaviour that we expect. We need to improve relationships with each other, and that includes for us a big journey with the police, and a big journey with AUSTRAC, but importantly a big journey with our counterparts in other states. And that means all of us being involved, not just the heads of the organisation. So some of you have come from organisations where it's only the head in the organisation that's actually part of the interagency networks across the country. If that is the case in your organisation, then I'd challenge you to think about getting involved in networks regardless of what level you are in the organisation, because that builds strengths and capacity within the organisation that you are working in. And restoring public trust. So we've done a lot of work so far to restore public trust, and we are on an ongoing journey to restore public trust. You know, that's a challenge, the interface between building resilience and helping people withstand scrutiny and criticism at the same time as restoring public trust. But we have had some pretty full-on conversations with Crown around setting down the line of who we are, who they are, and how we're going to get to an understanding amongst our own team and amongst their team about the separation between the regulated entity and the regulator. At the heart of that's really what it comes down to for us. All right, good.
Thanks, Lanie. Stay by the microphone.
Okay.
We'll take questions. Well,
if there are any.
We don't have a roving mic. Great presentation.
Thanks, David.
You made me feel slightly unusual for a moment.
Oh.
Because you said creating governance frameworks is not exciting work, and I was thinking,
oh.
I get really excited about getting, really sorting out a governance framework, making sure a process can be improved.
Yeah, good.
That's good stuff for me.
Well, if you'd like to take a pay cut, you can cut.
And you talked about, particularly around what you just said at the end, having a conversation with the regulated authority about what they are and what they do, sorting out a governance framework. A lot of this discussion comes around roles and responsibilities.
Yep.
And when there's confusion somewhere about what the role is and what the responsibility is, that creates bad outcomes.
Yep.
And if you're in regulation, it's not designed to be an easy time. There is inbuilt tension between the regulated entity. Some people are happy to be regulated. Not everyone's going to be happy to be regulated, whether it's an industry, business, or citizens. And that's probably where what NRCoP's about, which is the regulatory practice, is that the difficulties in those shades of grey, where there's confusion between roles and responsibilities, you're working in that grey area, and that's where you just need to practice at it every day, so you can drift off in the wrong direction if you're not really applying those first principles and some of those great lessons learned. So I'll get Slido up on the screen for the shy or introverted of the audience. But would anyone like to put their hand in the air and ask Lanie a question about the Commission or regulation more broadly?
Oh, for God's sake! Hang on a minute.
I'm just going to pop the Slido thing.
Realistically, this is just some observations, but having been in this space a long time myself involved, one thing you referred to delegations. I'm constantly surprised how little people understand about delegations, including senior public servants who have got to high positions, have no understanding of the importance. And the other is, historically, we've really struggled, I think, in terms of investigator capability in this state. I think actually in Australia, but very difficult to get quality people in investigations. And I don't think as a sector we've invested very much in that space. I think individual agencies may, but the sector hasn't. So I guess I'm interested in the view about the capacity for greater training sector-wide in those two fundamental issues of regulation.
Yeah. So the first one, I think you're absolutely bang on. Like, when I first arrived, we'd come from the same place where you had led a significant amount of work to make better our, what were already okay, delegations systems and bring those together across the organisation. And I think NRCoP should think about, having a session specifically on the journey that Demir's went on in relation to delegations, because it's the same journey that we're now on in relation to delegations. But the amount of things that were put to the Gaming and Wagering Commission, to myself, to the Chief Casino Officer for decision making, where they didn't have a delegation, the delegation was being affected, in a manner that was not lawful. There was no reporting to the GWC about when delegated decision making was being undertaken, and if you followed the Royal Commission, you see some critical decisions that were made by the Chief Casino Officer exercising delegation, where the instrument wasn't necessarily as perfect as it could have been, but it was never, the Commission was never advised of that, and that is, at worst, that is skullduggery. At best it's this like sloppy public service without appropriate capability framework put in place for those decisions. So there's a whole lot of work going on there. But when I first got there and I was presented with documents to sign, I was like, well, where's the cover memo explaining to me the delegation, and where's the instrument, and where's this? What do you mean? And I asked, as General Counsel, where's the delegations framework? Don't have one. So, well, what's your role in relation to racing, gaming and liquor? Oh, we were told they don't need us to help them. Oh, well, it's alarm. So if you don't have a best practice delegations framework and system operational, both in the terms of the register, the clarity, and then that flows into your governance, your business processes, then I would suggest that you need to be seriously discussing that within your organisation. The second thing, which is, we started talking, this is one of the reasons that NRCoP started here, was because, I went to an ANZSOG session of NRCoP in Melbourne just by chance, and they were talking about the New Zealand stewardship model and the capability development that was going on there with regulators in terms of whole of sector approaches to training inspectors, compliance officers, investigators, you know, all of the bits and pieces that fit together in our systems. And that's what I mean about, it's all the same. It doesn't matter whether you're regulating dangerous goods or whether you're regulating, you know, footpaths. It's like everybody needs all of those basics, and they need them to be operating well. And how much time have we spent trying to find people that don't exist? You know, really, we need to develop that capability. Now, I think that there will be developments for the public service in terms of more consistent capability development for WA. The degree to which that is fit for purpose for regulators remains to be seen, and I think the NRCoP's got work that it could potentially do with the streamline development people around what a capability framework and a training program would exist. Is there anyone here from Transport? Yeah, so Transport's got this, you know, I think Transport is probably Western Australia's best practice, unless someone wants to challenge me on that. You know, like they've really said about what is a consistent across these different areas, a consistent framework, and theirs is good because it's got the practical stuff. And I can say most of our guys have learnt on the tools, yeah? I don't know about in your agency, but most inspectors have learnt from other inspectors who came before them and other inspectors. Most decision makers once were inspectors, yeah? So it's just basically that progression that we've inherited. So yes, definitely, we would be the first to be signing up to a whole of sector Cert 4, and we've tried, you know, for investigators, but not just that, building a flow from TAFE, building a flow from the universities. How do we actually build people up, and then how do we remunerate them effectively? Because if we're not able to pay investigators or inspectors sufficiently, then we're going to have the same. It doesn't matter how well trained they are; they're going to go and work in the mines. So how do we actually find ways of being creative about the use of remuneration for that?
We've got some good news
good.
On the training and professional development side. So picking up on the New Zealand model, GREG, I think some of the audience and the chapter committee members are involved in working groups to create that professional development program through ANZSOG, through NRCoP, to be launched early next year. And that'll have the module, the foundations of regulation, things like roles and responsibilities, compliance, enforcement, and the like. So that's something which we're right in the middle of.
Fantastic.
And we hope to be able to launch that to all the agencies who are corporate members
early
next year.
Awesome. Well done.
Jenness, I'll get you to come join us on the front chair. Any other questions from the audience? I was curious just on the gambling side of things, Lanie, about the huge debate about the shift onto online, which I think is a challenge for regulators in all industries. Technology is going to move so much faster and might be 5 or 10 or 15 years ahead of our regulatory systems and processes about the tension between, say, supporting gambling at our one and only casino, which is easy to tax, for instance, and the huge amount of revenues which now are moving around the world and offshore for online gambling, and whether you've had a thought about how that fits into, say, the link between technology and the catch-up that regulators have to play, because we have to reform and update ourselves so much more quickly these days.
Capturing gaming operators who are operating in Western Australia who aren't paying tax is definitely an issue that needs to be looked at. In terms of gambling harm, I think where we've landed is that our focus has been very much on problem gambling, which is to say that we want to deal with the person, the bottom of the cliff issue. So if you're thinking about alcohol, you're only dealing with alcoholics. You're not dealing with the harm that alcohol causes in the community. And we're trying to reposition our thinking about gambling to be thinking about the harm that can be caused not just the problem gambling, and also the prevention in making decisions that benefit the casino for them to, when they are applying for new games, etc., is turning our minds to, as a commission, what's the harm impact here? Not what's the problem gambling impact, but what is the risk here, and the trust breakage, like the appropriate level of trust, not an inappropriate level of trust, helps the Commission to have much more of a critical eye on the impact of things like gaming speed and that kind of thing. I think online gaming and disruption in the gambling industry is an ongoing piece of work and a challenge for us to get to grips in how we regulate those ones that are sort of left the building. But it's a bit like regulating in product safety. How do you regulate an online Chinese marketplace? Never mind how do you regulate the dark web, in terms of the sale of products. There's a whole lot of modern regulatory practice that needs to be explored by regulators across the country in relation to how we protect our borders. I think things like data privacy, there's emerging issues of regulation. They're all going to present. Well, I think if you're a transport regulator and you don't think data privacy is going to confront you as a regulator very shortly, then you are sadly mistaken, and you're nodding, so I'm assuming that is very much on your agenda. So thinking about all these things that are going to come and impact on you.
What have you found to be the benefits of NRCoP in your previous, as an inaugural board chapter committee member and then chair for...
Hopefully that's working. Hello, Jenness, Gardner, CEO, Economic Regulation Authority. We're an independent small agency. We're off to the side a lot of the time, and it's a particular niche. Very important, obviously. It keeps the lights on and your water running and things like that, and potentially at a good price. And we do a lot of, as an agency, we do a lot of looking at counterparts in other parts of the country, but we don't look across different types of of other areas for regulation. So that for me has been a really rich seam where we've been learning a lot. So we focus a lot on the economics, but we don't necessarily focus a lot on regulatory practice. And it's in regulatory practice that there's a lot of learning for our agency. But I think also the fact that we have got a very strong and well-established national network of economic regulators is actually also a benefit to bring back to share with Western Australians, because there's a whole rich seam of what good economic regulatory practice looks like to share as well. So it's that two-way street, capacity to share experiences and understandings, that I think has been particularly beneficial.
I started my public sector career in the federal government 25 years ago in Canberra. It was all laissez-faire economics 25 years ago, and the mantra was very pro-business and anti any regulation. Wasn't a nuanced discussion about good regulation or bad regulation. Was any regulation's bad, and let's have a bonfire of as many regulations as we can find. I think in the last couple of years, our national, state and local response to COVID, I think really has changed the community's perception about the role that the public sector plays at those three tiers of government. The expert advice, the professional experience, the understanding of some very niche areas which we didn't think that we'd need to use in the way we have over the last couple of years. So I think governments at all levels now, because of the way Australia prospered comparatively to other parts of the world through our regulatory response, has given us more credibility. So I think now, when I was at school, when we were doing discussions about vocational education, no one was putting their hand up and said, when I grow up I want to be a government regulator. It was architect or marine biologist or other professions, but I think environmental health officers, the role that the police have played, all manner of other agencies that have been involved in our statewide and national response to COVID, I think really has lifted the status and the trust, because I think the community can see that governments at those three levels are here to protect the public benefit. Lanie, any closing remarks you'd like to make?
No, I'm just so happy that you, I was so happy when Jenness agreed to take over, and I'm so happy that you've agreed to take over, and there's such an amount of progress that's happened since the time, 2017 or whenever it was that we got started, and just, I've been so, through this whole journey of the Royal Commission and coming into a new department, both in the local government area and other areas, it's been so useful to me personally, but also so keen for the teams to actually get involved, because people need that support from each other, the guidance and the knowledge that others are out here and we're here and we need to get there, and they can help us to arrive there. But it's really reassuring to see where the sector is at. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thanks, Lanie. Thanks, Jenness. The professional development module is the next thing, and I think that'll take NRCoP to the next level. So please promote it throughout your agencies, with your staff. I think it will help junior officers coming into government for the first time, just to get those foundation understandings of the craft of regulation, what good governance is, and help guide us through the next phase of reform in the public sector. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have recorded the event, and we'll send that around to everyone so you can share it with your colleagues who may not have been able to get here today. Please contact myself, Lanie, or Jenness if you want to know more about NRCoP, and we've got a lot of chapter committee members here today as well, so hopefully you know who they are within your agency, and look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you, everyone.